Hello, everyone, to all the people beginning to join us. My name is Ross Wallace. I'm a principal at Santis Health and an advisor to the Resilient Healthcare Coalition. I'm incredibly excited for the forthcoming discussion. We're going to launch it in a minute or two once we've had a few more people enter the waiting room and into the meeting itself. We're expecting upwards of 150 attendees to this discussion, which is absolutely fantastic and speaks to the relevance, the timeliness, and the importance of this subject. So we'll just take a moment or two to make sure that we can get all those people in, and then we'll start. So thanks for your patience. Okay, folks, we're going to wait one more minute, and then we're going to jump in. We've just crossed some key thresholds here. Okay, everyone. So for those who didn't hear my introduction a few minutes ago, my name is Ross Wallace. I am a principal at Santis Health, public affairs, life sciences healthcare company. And I'm an advisor to the Resilient Healthcare Coalition. And it is my great pleasure to serve as moderator of this very dynamic and exciting conversation to come. I'm going to start by welcoming all of you informally, as I've just done, and then I'm going to read an important land acknowledgement. And then I'm going to pass the baton over to one of the two co-chairs of the Resilient Healthcare Coalition, Dr. Jason Field, who is President and Chief Executive Officer of Life Sciences Ontario, as well as his role at the Resilient Healthcare Coalition. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all of the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land which we each call home. I reside in Toronto, so I acknowledge the land I am on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Many of you are coming from all across Canada, so we acknowledge and reiterate the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this nation home from coast to coast to coast. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improve relationships between nations and to improve our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. So thank you for that. And now it's my great pleasure to pass things over to Dr. Jason Field, who I believe has joined us, and we'll talk a little bit about the Resilient Healthcare Coalition itself and why we believe RWE and the RWE revolution is so important to talk about today and well into the future. Jason.
Thanks so much, Ross, and glad to be able to join the panel today. Little technical challenges at the start there, but I made it just in time. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Resilient Healthcare Coalition, RHC brings together a diverse group of health system leaders from industry, research, patient groups across the public, private, and not-profit sectors. It really is a very unique organization in that regard. How we bring together these players on equal footing. So all of these stakeholders have an equal voice within the RHC. Our mission is really to create Canadian healthcare systems that improve patient care, health outcomes by evolving to become faster, nimbler, and better able to absorb future health crisis, much like what we've just experienced through the pandemic, which really tested the limits and capacity of our health systems. So we wanted to learn from that experience and see if we can build those more resilient systems. And we're really focused on two fundamental goals that we're prioritizing. The first is optimizing the use of healthcare data to better inform healthcare decisions. And the second is expanding and accelerating patient access to innovative health technologies, whether it's therapeutics and vaccines or medical devices and diagnostics. So you can see how this link between access and data is really a fit for this conversation that we're going to have today around real world evidence. You know, certainly times are changing, technologies are changing. We are seeing the increase need for speed and flexibility in terms of how we regulate and approve products with more precise medicine that is more targeted to specific areas of the population. Of course, we need to evolve and adapt in terms of how we understand clinical data going forward. So real world evidence is going to play a key role in those perspectives. I'll just finish up by thanking the RHC team, the team at Santis that supports the RHC in pulling together today's webinar. I'd also like to, thank all of our panelists. We have an amazing lineup of speakers today, including my co-chair at RHC, Eva Villalba, and we'll be hearing from her and the other panelists shortly. And I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to attend today, for your interest in RWE, for your interest in Resilient Healthcare Coalition, and we hope you enjoy this session. Ross, back to you.
Jason, thanks so much. That's fantastic. So perhaps I'll just take a moment to tell you how our time together is going to go. So we are fortunate enough to be able to we hope attract and engage and entertain all of you through sort of 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we have longer than an hour, which is wonderful. This is a subject that needs even more than 90 minutes, but we'll take a small dip in the RWE waters today and swim around in it for a while with all of you. So we'll be using the question function at the bottom, the sort of icon at the bottom of your Zoom screens, the Q&A function. If you use that as effectively the chat, those questions will be curated and distilled and analyzed by the team working on this webinar. And so keep them coming early and often, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. We're also going to have sort of 4 structured questions that I'm going to ask the panelists. And after a couple of those questions, we have very specific and structured Mentimeters that we'll be using to gauge the interest and engagement and perspectives of all of you kind of attending at home. So stay tuned for a couple of Mentimeters to come. You may want to already sort of jump into menti.com and get the code all set to go for those 2 opportunities coming in the forthcoming minutes. The code is at the bottom of this slide on the bottom right. But as we pop up the individual Mentimeter questions for you, you will also see the code again. So please use the question function and please get ready for the Mentimeter. And we're looking forward to ensuring that we can embed and adopt and address as many of the things you'd like to hear from us as possible over the course of this conversation. And with that, I think it's my great pleasure to introduce our panelists. So going in alphabetical order, I'm going to start with Dr. Meena Tadros. So Meena is an assistant professor at the Leslie Dan Faculty of Pharmacy at the University of Toronto. He's also a scientist at Women's College Hospital, a fellow at Women's College Hospital's Institute for Health Systems Solutions and Virtual Care, a director with the Ontario Drug Policy Research Network, and an adjunct scientist at ICES. Meena leads research focused on evaluating drug policies and post-marketing surveillance of medications. He works closely with policymakers and uses large data sets to answer questions about medications, real-world safety and effectiveness, and improving the optimal use of medications. Carleen Todd is the Vice President of Access at Roche Canada. She's a member of the RHC Steering Committee. She has extensive access experience over the past 20 years at Roche, leading the market access and public policy team at Roche Australia from 2012 to 2019, when she decamped to Canada. We're very happy to have her. She's also worked extensively with Medicines Australia on a wide range of issues relating to data, access, and value. Eva Villalba is the Executive Director of the Quebec Cancer Coalition and a co-chair, as Jason called out, of the Resilient Healthcare Coalition. Since 2008, she's been involved in healthcare charities, advocacy groups, and nonprofits. She holds an MBA from HEC in Montreal, completed an MSc in 2021 in healthcare transformation at the Value Institute of Health and Care at the University of Texas at Austin. And last but not least, Dr. Tyler Williamson. Tyler's the director of the Center for Health Informatics at the University of Calgary and also director of the university's Health Data Science and Biostatistics Diploma program. But of particular relevance for this conversation, he's co-director of the Alberta Real World Evidence Consortium. He's recognized across the country and beyond in optimizing the use of electronic medical record data for public health surveillance, health services research, and practice quality improvement. So those are the four exceptional speakers we have joining us today. And with that, I'm going to kick things off by jumping right into the first question that we want to ask these fine folks. So let's start by talking about, for all of you, your pathway into the world of RWE. How did you get into this space? And what are some of the most interesting and important projects and partnerships you're currently involved in? And Tyler, maybe we'll start with you.
Thanks, Ross. Happy to kick that off. I feel often like the newest participant in RWE. Excuse me. I've always worked in the areas of big data, and talked about my stuff related to EMR and health administrative data. But since taking over my role as the director of the Center for Health Informatics is really when I stepped into the RWE space. And so often I jokingly say, I feel like the fish out of water in the RWE conversations, because there's so many acronyms that float around, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm talking about here. But I've been doing sort of what I now understand RWE to be for a long time, just exclusively in an academic way, and it's been a really rewarding experience for me to step in and realize that there's lots of opportunity with these partnered research projects.
Carleen, let me go to you next, please.
Thanks, Ross. Hi, everyone. I guess my journey started about 20 years ago, as a health economist who started working in industry at Roche in Australia back in the year 2000. My teams and I have been using real-world evidence for years, actually, to assess the burden of illness, natural history of disease, compare the characteristics of patients and trials with clinical practice, utilize incidence and prevalence data when we're looking at budget impact models. So, they're just a few use cases. So, the use of real-world evidence is not new, but I guess the important question now is, are we ready and actually willing to accept using real-world evidence to support outcomes around effectiveness of treatments and patient-reported outcomes? And I think more than ever, as the biology of diseases becomes more understood, when we're seeing this move to more personalised healthcare, including rare diseases and areas of high unmet need, we're actually going to need to utilise high-quality real-world evidence like we've never done before. And this is where in rare diseases, we don't have access to randomized controlled trials. They're just not possible. And, we do have clinical uncertainties that we need to address. So, that's a really important role for us to be utilising real-world evidence. And maybe just a couple of projects where Roche Canada are collaborating with others in this space, including, biomarker-driven therapies in rare cancers, are two projects. So one of them is called PREDICT. And this is where Roche Canada is part of a joint initiative with BC Cancer and the Canadian Personalised Healthcare Innovation Network, or CFIN. And here we're creating a real-world evidence framework in British Columbia, known as, and I need to try and remember this, the Precision Oncology Evidence Development and Cancer Treatment Program, or PREDICT. And this program is designed to generate and assess real-world evidence, which we really hope we can utilise to help shape new reimbursement pathways for personalised cancer treatments. And the goal here too is to enable patients to access targeted therapy for rare cancer earlier, with this commitment to real-world evidence generation, so that we can evaluate clinical outcomes, but also patient-relevant outcomes and economic outcomes over time. And we're really keen to encourage others in both the public and the private sector to work with us as part of that initiative. And then secondly, just quickly, RareX. We've formed a collaboration with a partnership on data collection of global genes called RWE. And together we're working to remove one of the greatest obstacles actually to progress in this area of rare diseases. And that's by eliminating barriers where patients can actually engage and share responsibly research-ready data. And so we've created a open science data challenge, bit of a plug for it here. It's called Accelerate, and it launched at the end of May. And the here is on pediatric neurodegenerative diseases or neurodevelopmental diseases. And through this project, what we're hoping to do is with researchers across the globe, we will study rare disease data sets to actually help identify previously unrecognized symptoms. We want to be able to shorten the diagnostic odyssey, which we know is always a huge issue in rare diseases. And we want to do that through predictive analyses and also generate useful insights to advance therapeutic research. And so through this challenge, we're hoping that some of the top solutions will have the potential to access grants and enable stakeholders to work together on developing these solutions. So that's a little bit about me and the work we're doing at Roche Canada on real-world evidence. Thanks, Ross.
Amazing. Thanks, Carleen. Eva, let's go to you, and then Mina, you can close us off for round one.
Sure. So how did I get into this RWE space? I think it was, it's really, our focus at the Quebec Cancer Coalition has really been initially to look at how can health data actually improve the lives of patients. So not just for the system, not just for reimbursement, but how can health data actually ensure that we give the right treatment to the right patient at the right time. So that's how originally this RWE kind of conversation started amongst, our coalition, but also our more than 65 member organizations. Then I think what really changed is I took a couple of RWE master classes and realized the nuances and, the jargon that Tyler was talking about. What does it all really mean? At the end of the day, I always think, okay, but so what for the patient, like enough with this blah, blah, like what about the patient? How does it help them or hinder them? And then I think that what really got me excited in this space was all the work that I've been doing in value-based healthcare. And so seeing that we can only improve what we measure. And so it's really important what we do measure, and we haven't been measuring much actually. And we want to ensure that we're actually measuring things that matter to patients and that have an impact on patients. And so that's where the RWE conversation becomes more than just a buzzword, but can really actually impact patients. So a couple of the things that we've been very involved in is, I really like to say that in Quebec, we're a little bit more like innovative and we take risks because we do have that kind of vertical integration with our HTA at INES. And I think one of the interesting things is we were one of the first provinces to actually have a health data strategy. So we have been involved, and even with RHC, we got the opportunity to talk to some key people that were involved in the Pan-Canadian Health Data Strategy and kind of, ensuring that responds to the needs of patients. But closer to us in Quebec, we were very much involved in there were 2 health data bills, and now it's become a law. So, within 1 or 2 years, we should see massive changes in our culture in terms of what we measure, how we have access to it, and how it could actually impact the lives of citizens. And so that was one thing. The other element that we really got involved with RWE and I think it's very promising is we actually to build on Carleen's point earlier about rare diseases. I think we actually realized that for rare diseases, but actually going further to rare conditions. So looking at this precision medicine, looking at the rarity of subgroups that might also need that flexibility. So we did do we made a proposal to INES on adopting a special, more flexible framework for evaluation of rare conditions that would enable conditional approvals with a collection of real world evidence that would enable outcome-based agreements, which is another one of my favorite projects. And so how would that actually improve the problems that we have for rare conditions, namely, delays in access, less treatments because of this higher uncertainty, because of this higher price, but we need to look beyond cost and we need to look more towards value. And how do we do that? We need real world evidence. And so maybe I'll finish with this. The project that I'm most excited about is an outcome-based agreement or value-based agreement demonstration project in Quebec, where we have multiple stakeholders around the table. We have some patient groups, we have obviously industry, but we also have government. We have INES, we have the Ministry of Health, and we're all really looking at what would outcome-based agreements look like in Quebec. How can we actually improve time to access, but at the same time mitigate that risk in terms of, high uncertainty, high cost, and actually use that as a learning opportunity. And so this outcome-based agreement tying an improvement of health outcomes for patients to reimbursement, that's one example of many, because RWE can be used in many, contexts. And I think we're going to talk about that today, and maybe I hope bust some myths, because I think a lot of the reticence around RWE is around assumptions that we have that are may or may not be true. So I'm excited to talk about that today in the context of outcome-based agreements, but ultimately in the context of, does it actually help our citizens? Does it actually help patients and families? Because otherwise, let's not do it for a merely academic exercise. I'm not interested in participating in that. That we can leave that to the pure academic. So we're happy to have Tyler, who crosses the threshold, and Mina, who also does a little bit of both and has feet in both worlds. So yeah, I'm excited for the conversation today.
Amazing. Thanks, Eva. Mina, to you.
Facts to follow. So I like to tell people that, my thinking about RWE really shifted on a random phone call about 7 years ago, where as one of the people as part of the Ontario Drug Policy Research Network, which just briefly is basically a rapid response team that helps use data to answer questions for the Ministry of Health in Ontario, and has been around for 13 years or so. And so at that point, we've been doing observational research, like Tyler hinted, for years. And we've been using routinely collected data to answer many of these questions using ICS and bringing in better and better data for a long time. And our main user of our information was the Ministry of Health. And on a call, they turned to us and said, hey, do you guys know anything about this RWE thing that pharma keeps talking to us about? And I had to mute the phone call and just be like, but, we've been doing this for you for years now. But it's at that moment that I realized that as much as everyone's saying this is a buzzword, the power of being able to sell its use was missed on us academics. We did a really bad job. I used to go to parties and when I was younger and cooler, and people would say, what do you do for a living? And I would give them the academic geeky answer of, I conduct observational studies using routinely collected data. And that's usually when people just stop talking to me. And I think that's where the policymakers also stopped listening to me. And so when you're able to say things that resonate with people, such as using a term like real world evidence, it's rather brilliant because it makes it accessible, easy to understand. And since that time point, we've continued to build on our use of real world evidence, which foundationally was to help the ministry answer these questions through EPRN. And since then, I've kind of made it a goal of mine to help improve and solve some of the problems to, continue to the uptake and impact of what this data can mean and how using this information can benefit people. So some of the projects I'm most excited about is continuing that strong foundation of helping policymakers better understand how they can use this evidence to inform their decisions, how to embed it throughout the process so it's not an afterthought, but it's a pre-thought, which solves a lot of things. But also just trying to help the ecosystem both nationally and locally in getting there. And so part of that work was working with CADITH and Health Canada to develop the guidance. And part of that work is to develop international links. So I'm really excited about where Canada's starting to fit into the ecosystem. So for example, we're part of a few projects right now where the EMA has questions. And so they're coming to us to replicate studies here in Canada, which showcases the power of being able to do that and work with our international colleagues and sort of put us on the map. And so for me, it's continuing to do that and build this ecosystem in Canada. And lastly, I think I'm really excited. I'm one of the members of CoLab, which is this new sort of the extension of DCEN and what that meant in the very beginning, and continuing to build the ecosystem in Canada to solve some of these problems and better use RWE. And I'm happy to dive into all of those things, but all to say that I think we all understand the power of it. We understand the opportunity of it. And to Eva's great point, it's like, how do we get this moving along so that we become, my goal is to make Canada the prime time location globally that people want to come and do this kind of work. And that's kind of what what I'm most excited about.
Thank you, all of you, for that. That was fantastic. And Mina, just, I think you left us with a few breadcrumbs that we're going to come back to conversationally. And one is around sort of Canada and where it fits into a global landscape and opportunities to not only collaborate, but also lead. And I think, certainly folks are going to be really interested to hear your thoughts and your advice on sort of post-guidance document. We started granular, we started technical, where do we go kind of for here beyond that foundation? I think that's, couple of subjects we'll touch on, as well as things introduced by all of our speakers. I think, maybe just a quick editorial from me. I mean, I think that the amount of interest in this webinar and in this subject speaks to the power and the potential and the promise of RWE, but realizing that promise and actually sort of unpacking what are the specific kind of aspirational areas we need to drive towards, what are our North Stars, and then also, where do we want to, where are we being blocked? What are the impediments, the barriers, the challenges that are preventing us from getting there? And then even more specifically, what do we have to do as individuals, as organizations, as an ecosystem to capture the promise that we're also excited about? Because I think we've had a lot of high-level 10,000-foot conversations about RWE, and spoiler alert, everyone thinks it's great. The question, though, becomes, what does that actually mean? And what are the incremental collaborative instruments and initiatives and actual steps that need to be taken for us to seize the day, if you will, and become that global center for RWE that Mina articulated? Because I think that's a really powerful shared vision. And speaking of shared visions, I'd actually like to hear a little bit more from each of you around your ultimate vision for this optimization of RWE across Canada. So, what is the end state we should be looking towards? And I'm thinking kind of medium to long term. So let's say 5 to 10 years. Where do we hope we can get to? What would be the sort of clearest sign that we are achieving that opportunity and realizing that promise and potential that you've all talked about? And Carleen, maybe I'm going to go to you first, and then Mina, I'll come back to you, and then Eva, and then Tyler.
Thanks, Ross. My ultimate vision, I guess, would be for ensuring we have consistent, high quality, accessible, and connected real-world evidence, because it's only through that we can actually improve those decisions that we're trying to make for individual patients, as Eva has discussed, but also at a population level and at a health system level. And we need that connected data because we've got to break down some of those data silos that we currently have in place. We need to be able to address some of those clinical uncertainties that we have, particularly in rare diseases. We need to be able to address healthcare inequities that we saw loud and clear through COVID, and we're consistently seeing in many pockets of our communities. And it enables us to share that financial risk as well, so that when we do have high-cost medicines with long-term benefits that have yet to have been realised, we do need to find ways as manufacturers working with governments to share that risk more appropriately. So, another piece of that, and Eva spoke to the importance of moving from cost to value, is that real-world evidence, high-quality real-world evidence that is consistent, does enable us to look more holistically at value, and so that we can consider things like, what is the impact on society? What is the impact on carer productivity, patient quality of life, of health system efficiency? So yes, clinical outcomes are really important, but we have to move beyond that as well. And through this better data, I guess my vision is, and the better decision making then enables us to have more improved timely access for patients to existing and new health technologies, while also making better investment decisions so that our systems remain sustainable. Because, we are challenged at the moment. It is taking time for Canadians to have access to health technologies. They're waiting an average of 2 years to access technologies that their friends and families in Europe and the US are accessing in half the time. So how do we move to a place like we're seeing in Europe, where real-world evidence is being used to develop managed access programs, outcomes-based agreements that Eva's spoken to, so that we can share that financial risk and more timely access to care. But this end state, I guess, of timely access to care can only happen if we've created a health system that's learning, a health system where all the health data, so clinical, medical resource use, patient-reported outcomes, and experience data are integrated, and then can flow from the research setting all the way through to the clinical practice setting. So that's feeding into that learning cycle. And that world is one where across all sectors, we're sharing, we're accessing, we're using the same data to collectively make better informed decisions about care, about access, about workflows, and about funding. So yeah, that's my vision for the next 5 years.
Thanks, Carleen. That's a lot, but I think we can do it. Mina. Oh, you're on mute, Mina. Gold,
Sorry,
though.
thank you.
What
It's bound
what
to
you just said
happen
would have been
once, right?
gold. Yeah.
I know, it was amazing. I kind of wasted all my good thoughts right there. No, I was going to say that, you know, Carleen's vision sounds exciting, and I just want to kind of push a little bit more on what I envision. My hope is that in 10 years, when there's a new novel treatment or therapeutic option, that we have a system. So we have a system that, as they're planning the drug development phase, they understand which pathways they'll need to go in. So the manufacturers will have options and have some clarity on what are their best options here. Now, part of this is a global, and we're starting to see this with ICH, and we're starting to see the regulators talking to each other and HTA agencies talking together, but that a manufacturer will understand through early scientific advice and conversations that where does the RWE fit into ensuring that the evidence that's developed is going to give the best possible picture of the benefits and risks of that medication as early as possible, so it's not an afterthought. So RWE is not a band-aid that comes when we know we can't run a trial, when the trials have uncertainty at a level that we don't understand, so that, you know, when that drug is about to leave that last mouse and jump into the first human, right? I'm obviously facetiously oversimplifying that, but in that step, there's a game plan. So that's the global picture of what it means for a new therapeutic agent, that we know where RWE can fit into the game plan. Now, we're not going to use it for everything, and I hope we use it for everything, but we're not going to use it in the same way for everything. Let me just restate that. And then, so at that global level, once a entity, innovator makes up their mind about where they're going to use it, and they've talked to the regulators, that the first place they think about doing this is Canada. That they say, I can do part of this RWE study in Canada, just like when they think about part of an RCT, which for the large part has left most of Europe and Canada, and, you know, we don't get as many as we used to, that they come here, and that when they show up to Canada, there is a system that's ready for them to plug and play into, that will continue throughout the life cycle of a drug, even when it receives regulatory approval, even when it goes through HTA, and continues through that, that has minimal red tape, and allows a system that's ready to uptake it and use it and get that data back on a national level. Like, is really, so there's that global level of where RWE fits in, and that we align globally, but that we have a system here that's ready and willing to do that. And it's one of the first places that we think about globally for RWE being able to happen. And that would be the ultimate 10-year goal, I think, for us.
I mean, that notion of sort of moving upstream and thinking about how actually Canada becomes a world leader in RWE as a sector of acumen, as a sort of capacity for sort of, you know, not only making our systems better here, but attracting the kinds of investments required to really springboard this to a whole new level is that's really exciting stuff to hear. Eva, let's go to you, and then we'll close off with Tyler.
So my vision for RWE in Canada is that it actually helps get the right treatment to the right patient at the right time. So that's this timeliness. I think that a lot of the, you know, when we're looking at what's being done elsewhere, we see, like, for example, and I know we're going to talk about it later, but this is what I'd like for Canada is for patients to be able to make to participate in shared decision making if they choose to be partners in their own care in that way, and that we can actually inform them, like, what did other people like you respond to this treatment like? You know, what like not just the general like broad, well, this is what was in the clinical trial, but really personalizing the treatment based on evidence, based on other people like me. I'm not like other people, but there's smaller cohorts that I can compare myself to make better decisions based on how this is going to respond, you know, to my needs, to my preferences. So I think my vision is we need to start, you know, measuring outcomes that matter to patients. So what I would like to see is not just clinical outcomes, but also quality of life metrics becoming more and more important. Yeah. So we're talking about patient-reported outcome measures, but also that the role of the experience for the patient is also considered. You know, so like, does the person have to lose work? Does the person, you know, get to return to work sooner? Do they get to do the activities that bring them joy in life? So that kind of integration into the collection of data that we use to make healthcare decisions and health policy decisions. I think that's where we need to go. And that requires a paradigm shift. That requires a cultural shift that I think, you know, we need to start working on now in order to get to that vision that we need. And the other, maybe last point I would make is, you know, really having this multi-stakeholder approach and recognizing that patients and patient groups have a lot to contribute to the conversation and have been traditionally neglected. So we did a really interesting study on the outcomes that matter to colorectal cancer patients with CRAN, with the Colorectal Cancer Resource and Action Network. And we use that to build on our value-based healthcare demonstration project and to really start measuring the things that matter to them. There were tools to measure them. They just weren't being prioritized because we were only looking at clinical outcomes. And there's some other great examples, like Ovarian Cancer Canada did an Every Woman study. And there's some nuggets there that could really inform what types of real world evidence we should be collecting that we're not. So I think we need to really integrate the patient voice, patient advocacy groups that have been doing a lot of this great work that normally are not part of the discussion around real world evidence, and really having this multi-stakeholder approach to ensure that we're measuring what matters, but also that it's having an impact on getting the right treatment to the right patient. And I think that in closing, I think the last thing is, are we still using treatments just because we keep adding to the list, but we're not removing things that are no longer as optimal as the newer stuff coming down the line? And I think that's an opportunity for RWE to, you know, not make patients waste their very precious time, life, quality on 1, 2, 3 lines of treatment that aren't going to work because they look cheaper. The value is not there if you're not improving the lives of patients. And ultimately for the payers, public or private, it's not better to waste your money on treatments that won't work. And I think that RWE can help us make some of those reevaluations, you know, and I think that there's some myths around that in terms of RWE will take drugs away from patients that are using them. That's simply not true. It's just about not giving those drugs to newer patients because we've evaluated that they're not as efficacious as some other alternatives. And so I think that we really need to go beyond like the buzzwords and the very superficial level RWE conversations and start talking about the consequences of RWE. How can it help? What are some hesitancies that people have? Let's address them, you know? And when I say people, yes, the general public, but mostly even public and private payers still have like these myths and these notions of why we shouldn't do this. So I think we need to start taking, you know, a deeper dive into some of these, you know, consequences of applying RWE in the real world in ways that will make a meaningful impact for patients and their families.
Eva, thanks for that. I mean, I think, you know, sometimes the default is to think about RWE as an additional tool to reduce uncertainty for new exciting things. But there's an RWE in a sort of life cycle management, ongoing value maximization piece too, that I think sometimes gets short shrift. So it's really important to call that back up. Tyler, do you want to close off this session for us?
Yeah, thanks, Russ. You know, as I like jotted down my notes, as I even thought through it, like consistently the things that I was like, these are the points I want to make were covered by Carleen and then by Mina and then by, I mean, and Carleen, I think you set us out with a very inspiring vision for where we want to be. So you've got my vote if you decide to run for office. Like that was exactly where I want us to go. I think that the vision that I see, Ross, is I want decisions that are made across the health system to be informed by our data. And like, it doesn't matter what decision's being made. It doesn't matter who's making that decision. I want decisions that impact Canadians to be informed by Canadian data. And I think when I reflect on kind of when decisions are being made around any different number of things, that happens pretty regularly. And often we're asking people to operate without supplying them Canadian data to be able to answer those questions. Sometimes we don't collect it, and sometimes we need to, Eva did a great job of explaining to us, how we need to do better. And we all know that we need to do better at engaging those who are impacted by these decisions more completely. But I think that that's the direction we want to be pushing in. I didn't in my earlier comments share one of the most exciting projects I'm working on, because it didn't even occur to me, because to me it's sort of outside the RWE space, which just shows my own limitations in the way that I think about this. But it's about driving forward our provincial health data strategy, because I need, as a consumer of data, as a user of data, and as a person who's trying to bring data to decisions, we need to have, we need to be moving that forward. And I think that we need to move from this space of data custodianship and protectorism, probably not even a word, protectionism, but move into a space where those that hold data have a responsibility to use it for the benefit of those whose data they hold. And we don't have that presently. And that's some of the exciting stuff that I'm working on that I think is where we really need to drive in the next 10 years.
I mean, I think as you're talking, Tyler, it's interesting that one of the, we talked about the global piece and maybe coming back to sort of Canada, and the world, Canada leading the world, learning from the world, but there's also a pan-Canadian interjurisdictional, provincial, federal, territorial piece here too, because we have provincial health systems insofar as we have systems for health in Canada. And so we want to see different pockets of excellence and leadership and different approaches across the country. But we also want to figure out a way to pull those insights and those learnings and frankly, the actual technical interoperability as widely and as consistently and as coherently across the country as possible. So we don't just have a whole bunch of tiny little data sets for individual provinces, but that we actually start to really feel like we have something that is bigger and bolder and more successful in that. So I hope we come back to that too. Okay, we have two more structured questions for you guys, and we're about halfway through our timing. So we're in good shape, but I'm going to gently push you to go a little bit more concisely, because I want to sort of throw back to some of the really interesting questions we're getting in the chat. And I also have two Mentimeters that we're going to throw to people momentarily. So the next question we're going to ask, and this one has a Mentimeter with it, so we'll show the Mentimeter in a sec. But this one really is where, okay, we've talked about sort of how you all got here. We've talked about your vision. Now we're going to talk about the impediments, the barriers, the challenges, the hurdles, all of the things that are gumming up the works, preventing more impactful collaboration, and derailing us from accomplishing the visions you've articulated and the promise that we're all so excited about. So I'm going to get you all to talk a little bit about what you think are the biggest sort of challenges or gaps or needs for us to address in order to kind of course correct from where we are now. And we're gonna also ask all of you following along at home to do the same thing. So there is the first Mentimeter question at menti.com. You can see the code there, or for the super tech savvy, just fire your phone up and use that QR code. And then we're giving you some choices to select across. We'd like you to pick your top 3 choices. They are not mutually exclusive. They're all a bit, they blend into each other. You're going to say some of these, like, they're not the same, or they are the same. Just go with it. We're just interested in hearing your views at a flash perspective of sort of which ones really resonate with you. So we'll show the results when we get to the end of this question, and then and we'll give the panelists the chance to reflect on that a little bit too. So do your Mentimeters, and perhaps I'll start. Eva, do you want to take a first crack at barriers and obstacles, and then I'll walk us through what everybody else on the line wants to hear about?
Sure. I think what we've seen with the health data bill is that there was a lot of talk about like this privacy issue, the payer hesitancy, and also the lack of data access and interoperability. But honestly, I don't think that's the main problem. If I had to summarize in one sentence, what is the biggest hurdle? It is the cultural change that I alluded to before. We are not used to measuring to improve. we're used to seeing measurement as a threat and as a judgment. And in order to have learning health systems, and by the way, for learning health systems to work, you need to include patient partners and actually the people who detain the experiential knowledge of what it's like to be on the receiving end of these changes. I think that that's what's missing. So I think that the first step, and I do think that the Pan-Canadian Health Data Strategy, I think that the health data bills, I think a lot of the rare disease strategies happening, and again, very proud of Quebec for being the first, and we're having this other one in the rest of Canada that's only looking at the cost of expensive drugs and not so much on the impact of the whole rare disease challenges on patients. But I think that these are opportunities to change the paradigm and the culture. And we need to start seeing transparent sharing of data. Yes, protecting privacy. Yes, kind of reassuring the population and decision makers that your data will be protected, but that it's being used to improve your life. And that is a paradigm shift. And even for healthcare professionals to be like, we're not imposing an additional administrative burden on you. We're actually doing this so that the stuff that you're collecting actually gets used. And it's not just to, have a nice report or to help other people. It's actually going to help you practice better clinically, and it's going to help your patients. But that's a paradigm shift. That's a big change, and measuring what matters, measuring value and not cost, that's a paradigm shift. So for me, that's the biggest hurdle. I do think that we're heading there. I think that there's less resistance than there used to be. I think that there's a lot of like this maintaining the status quo in terms of like accounting principles. Like that's one of the hurdles for outcome-based agreements. No, we don't want to do this more complex thing. Just automate it, guys. So, I think that culture, that would be my vote, is like that cultural shift. All the other stuff, yes, but if you don't actually change our approach to data and RWE, like why should we do this? Why should I waste my very precious time collecting real world evidence? If we don't change that, everything else is moot.
Thanks, Eva. Carleen, do you want to take a kick at that?
Yeah, +1 and Roche words to everything you just said, Eva. Completely agree. I actually wrote it down, what you said, the importance of data is being used to improve your life. And Mina spoke to this a little bit earlier as well. We haven't really been clear on why real world evidence and access to data is important for all stakeholders in a language that we all understand. And that helps create trust as well. And so I think that's a really key starting point, because when we don't have a good understanding of the why and appreciate how the benefits of sharing and using data outweighs the risk, especially for patients with high unmet need who have rare conditions, who frankly don't have any other options and don't have time, I think that's really, really key. And so we haven't really been clear on that causal link between why we need real world evidence and its role to actually support better outcomes and the lives of patients. Maybe just to add to that cultural piece, I also think there's it feels a bit like there's a desire sometimes to mitigate all uncertainties, and this is not going to be possible with the technologies that we actually have in front of us today, or for the rare conditions that we're fighting. So we have to be able to accept some of these uncertainties and share the risk of those uncertainties better. And then lastly, axe the facts. Like we really have to axe the facts, because there really is a lack of digitalization and standardization of data, and so it's getting better, but we really have to get rid of the facts so that we can actually do what we want to do with data in a way that's meaningful for patients.
Tyler. Thanks, Carleen.
Yeah, I mean, again, one more +1 to the mix. I'm quite curious to see what the attendees think are the big barriers. I'm pretty excited. I'm a little envious that you're sitting looking at it, Ross. But oh, you don't know either. Okay, well, to me, like Carleen even just said, like it comes down to trust and lack of understanding and like all of these things. I mean, even as a relatively new, convert to the RWE space, I what I expected and what I'm finding are not the same. And I think that we just need to really work hard to help everybody. Like, we're all trying to accomplish good things here. And I think that sort of that understanding of what all of our collective goals are and how they line up is going to help us get to that next phase, right? And it comes from lack of understanding and lack of trust, in my opinion.
Tyler, thanks for that. And Mina, we'll go to you and then we'll throw up the results. I think I'm really glad you mentioned trust, because it feels like A, was one of the things we threw into the mix as one of the options for folks to reflect on, and B, as we all know, it's an incredibly hard thing to create and a really easy thing to screw up. And maybe as we get into the instrumentation of our response and how and what we want to do together, we really need to think about what is the layer of trust that we can continue to invest in to ensure that we can have these challenging conversations across the whole hiccup. So, Mina, I'll let you offer a couple of minutes of thought, and then let's see what the assembled multitudes have from their perspective.
I'm excited to see this. I think, well, before I jump into my answer, axing the facts as a pharmacist, I can just massive +1 million behind that one. I think I'm just gonna put that out there. I think I too often, that's just a whole different problem. I'll start off by answering by saying where the problem isn't. The problem is not in methods. The problem is not in data sources. We have many. They just don't talk to each other, right? That's the real problem. And, obviously I'm those areas need some work, but they're not where the problems are. To me, there's sort of two major sets of problems that I'm thinking about and trying to solve. First is a capacity issue both in people that are trained up and ready to go across the spectrum, whether it's people reviewing these things, people helping develop them, people submitting them, people, at every spectrum of the place, there's some capacity to keep up with this. But from a data perspective, there's a lack of capacity on how to integrate and bring in all the partners, how to do public-private partnerships, how to bring in novel data sets from patient support programs or from patient groups or registries or whatever it may be, to actually unleash this data, because data by itself as a single entity is mediocre at best. And so when we bring it together, it really unleashes that power. And, that problem of that capacity to me is a system issue. And what really opened my eyes to this was a very simple thing. We tried to bring in a novel data set, a massive registry of about 500,000 people. The linking of the actual data took less than a week. The negotiation of the contracts and the paperwork took 2 years.
Yeah.
If nothing articulates this problem any more broadly of where the hurdles are, where the system doesn't, it's not the first data set. It's not going to be the last data set. It's not the same privacy issues. It's not it's all the same problems we've been through. And yet it was almost like we were revisiting it from the very beginning. And so this is what I'm talking about. If we can build the capacity to quickly and nimbly be able to integrate this, here's the standards, this is what people agree on, this is the data sharing agreement, this is what it looks like. That process should not be 2 years. And I think it speaks to the lack of trust and some of those issues that exist in that place. And I think that's really what holds back a lot of this, is thinking through those problems. So,
And on that, let's see what the audience thought. Okay. Well, we got some abs. So, and remember, we asked folks to pick their top three. So we definitely have insufficient understanding of RWE's value, which I think is a fascinating one, because we also have a bit of this tendency to sort of preach to the choir, and we all know this is a big deal. The question is, what are we going to do about it? But clearly there is, not as broad and as deep enough of an understanding of this value kind of across the political and public ecosystem, and those are different ecosystems, obviously. Lack of data access and interoperability, and Mina, you spoke to some of that right there. And then a whole bunch of things sort of clustered in the 13, 15 10, and then privacy is the lowest. And maybe that is actually a small piece of optimism in these results, that people are not quite as hung up on some of this. Maybe it's one of the myths that's already being busted, Eva, to use your great language. So anybody want to unpack or reflect on what you have in front of you as panelists before you move to the next question?
Yeah, I kind of want to jump in here. So ICS did this interesting, so for people who don't know, it's an institute in Ontario that houses most of the ministry's data here. And it's where I'm a scientist. And so I think as part of their engagement, because they're written into law as being what we call a prescribed entity, they have special capacity within the government, but they're getting everyone's data, right? They're getting all of our data, all of us as patients, they're getting all our data. And so there's an important question there about trust and privacy. And so they did these focus groups in a scientifically rigorous manner to better understand what are people comfortable with? What's the public appetite in this space? And this is not the first study of this sort, and aligns really nicely with the literature. But what they found is, and speaking of like sort of the privacy concerns and the value, is patients felt as long as the data was being used to improve their health, they were comfortable with this, right? They didn't care if there was partnerships, if there was like, as long as the rules were, they like privacy regulations and things that ensure that we can't tell, but they wanted to better understand if it's being used to improve my health or the healthcare system in any way. They were all on board. And I think that's important to understand. I think it's important to always have that as our North Star, because if we're not doing that, then what's, really what's the point of all of this?
That's super. It feels like there is a willingness and a hunger in a lot of quarters to have a mature conversation about this, but we're still maybe not having quite the one we need to, certainly as loudly, as frequently, and as safely as we have to. Any other thoughts from folks? Carlene, not sure if you want to get in. Maybe not. Or Tyler or Eva? Eva.
I can, it's interesting because we see lack of data access and interoperability as like the number one thing. I think it's an excuse we've been giving ourselves. I mean, in our day and age with, in Quebec, we like to talk about how awesome we are at like AI, at artificial intelligence and stuff. Listen, our interoperability was way more of an issue before we knew what to do with like disparate databases. Today, we do have ways of taking disparate databases, collating them, and then analyzing them. It's like less of an issue than it used to be, but that's an excuse we like to tell ourselves. That's number one. And I think that, again, with this cultural shift, we can actually, have better interoperability standards. The Pan-Canadian Health Data Strategy and the Quebec Data Bill, or law now, does address some of those issues. And it's not going to be easy, but I think once we have a common objective, we'll work on that, and that'll be better. That relates also to the lack of federal, provincial, territorial collaboration. And honestly, that's where Quebec is not at the top. That's where we're the worst in collaborating with the ROC, as we call it, the rest of Canada. And so that has traditionally been a problem. However, in the new health data law, they finally accepted to share their data with CIHI and others. So hallelujah. Now we'll be able to talk to our neighbors and share things and make better decisions, which we saw was essential during the pandemic. So I think that's also traditionally been an issue. There's, more openness. There were the federal health transfers that were tied to health data. And, we have to be special snowflakes in Quebec and say, we'll let you know, like, don't call me, I'll call you. We'll share what we want. But at the same time, we have had these very public dashboards. And so we do have these metrics that we will be able to share with the rest of Canada. So I think what's most interesting about this is the two first ones, which is what, our conversation was really around. And I think that's what's, to your point, what's harder to build, but it's essential to the foundation. So it's very interesting, what came out, but I think it's not surprising, but the good news is that the two worst ones, I think we're currently working on them. So that's positive.
So with that, I'm actually going to keep us going, because now we get to talk about, what do we do to address these challenges? So this is the specific investments, the initiatives, the partnerships, the collaboration, and the commitments that need to be delivered to address these barriers and challenges, and also, of course, to capture the possibility and increase the likelihood we reach that North Star that you all articulated. And as you think a little bit about, where do we go? What are the granular steps we need to be taking now? And by now, I mean, let's say sort of 12 to 18 months. I also want to give you sort of 2 questions to think a little bit about that have appeared in the Q&A session, because I think you may want to tailor your responses to include some of these pieces, because both of them I think are really thought-provoking. We'll come to some other questions after. But a number of people have flagged the importance of sort of the patient perspective. So how are patients being included? How do they need to be included? How can communities ensure that they feel like they own their own data as these discussions are happening sort of around them? What is the sort of safe, appropriate, ongoing way to engage those constituencies, patients first and foremost, in this work? So there's one that we've heard from a couple of folks in different forms. A second really interesting one that jumped out at me is this question of bias. So, somebody said, listen, is there a way that we can, better manage bias when it comes to RWE? And frankly, there's bias in RCTs as well. So first of all, we need to think about kind of holistically controlling for, or at least calling out bias where we see it. But that's not just an RWE conversation. That's actually ways in which we get data from different data gathering forms conversation. So would love people's thoughts on patient inclusion, would love your thoughts on sort of bias mitigation, and overall really interested to hear from all of you. What do we need to do now? And spoiler alert, that will be the next Mentimeter to come. So maybe we throw the Mentimeter back up for a sec before we turn to the first answer from the panelists, just to make sure that folks are putting in their own answers to this, because this is really important. Okay, guys, so again, menti.com, here's the code. This is not a forced ranking or you get 3 sort of, stickies to put up against your top priorities. This one, we're actually gonna make you offer some input in an open text box for us. So you can be as verbose as you'd like. You can also be as concise as you like. We're really excited to see whatever you come up with. So there you go, same as before. Okay, so let's drop that. And in terms of where we go from here, what needs to happen next first, most specifically? Eva, maybe I'll go to you.
So unsurprisingly, I am going to advocate for better inclusion of patients and patient groups who have this macro view. But I would actually also add to that traditionally underserved communities who often get left out. And if we're talking about biases and inequities, that's a big red flag. I think, including them in the conversation of what data do we need to collect and how. Sometimes academics parachute in and they're like, fill this survey for me. It'll only take you 90 minutes of your precious time, and without explaining the why. So I think that that's like one of the first, key steps in terms of collaborations, like really co-creating the collection of meaningful data that will have an impact on communities with those communities. So I'll keep it at that, because I know my colleagues will have lots of other interesting things to say. But the last point is patients have to be able to own the data that they share with communities, researchers, governments, healthcare systems. We need to be the owners of that, and we need to decide what we're comfortable with, what we're not. And in order to get more buy-in, and somebody mentioned it before, you just have to explain how their data will be protected and what it will be used for. And people are ready to contribute to the greater good, even if it doesn't affect them individually. But we have to take the time to actually communicate that, which we haven't done. It's just lazy, because it's not like it costs money, So I think that we need to respect people enough to say, if you're going to take your time and share your very precious health data with us, let's make sure that you can actually access it as well, and that you know what it's being used for, and ideally even, see the results of that. So I'll keep it at that, and I'm sure my panelists have other things to contribute as well on that subject.
Eva, maybe I'll just I'm gonna you did a nice job of trying to let me go on, and I will in one sec, but I wanted to come back to you just for a sec, because you offered a couple of examples when you described sort of the stuff you're finding inspiring and engaging at the beginning of the session. And I wondered, if you'd like, I'll give you a chance to come back and reflect on, like, are there key success factors or learnings from those projects, particularly about the ways in which at a kind of project design or project execution level, you saw patient involvement in a robust and impactful way?
Yes.
That might be worthy of other projects too?
Yes, because I take it for granted now that people know this, but the main key success factor is to not engage in tokenism and ask patients at the end, once all the academics and like government people have like gone through it and they're like, look what we presented, what do you think? That's terrible. That's not going to succeed. What you need to do is actually co-create with the people with lived experience, to measure what really matters to them. And yes, of course, there's always going to be those clinical outcomes that have traditionally been used. But, you know, is overall survival really the only metric that matters? No,
Yeah.
People are living longer. They want to live better. They don't just want volume of time. They want quality of time, you know? So I think that we really need to co-create. That means including patients from even the conception of the trial design, the conception of the methodology. And thanks for bringing me back to that, because I kind of take it for granted now that everyone knows that. But that's really the key success factor, is like, if you really want to respond to the needs of people, make sure that the people that your needs that you're trying to, you know, target are included in the conversation, because a lot of researchers or government policy decision makers, they just assume that they know. And if people leave with one thing, it's never assume, go to the source, ask the people that will be affected, the communities that will be affected, you know, to be part of the co-creation of the methodology, of the measurement tools, of, you know, how you're going to collect this, what you're going to do with it, how you analyze it, that framework, that analysis framework. And if you do that, then you'll actually be responding to the needs of the people that you're trying to serve. Otherwise, it's going to be the same old, and we're just going to, you know, be responding to like the needs of imaginary people. And I think that we can do better now.
Thank you. Tyler, why don't you go next?
Yeah, thanks, Ross. I was hoping you'd pick me next. So thanks, Ev. I some really great thoughts. You know, and I saw the question in the chat that in the Q&A that was addressed specifically to me. And, you know, I think there's the present way that we're doing it, and there's the right way. And I think that, so we need to give ourselves the opportunity to continue to grow, to be better at that. But, you know, we simply must be moving in this direction. I can think of, you know, there's even a participant on the call on the webinar who I noticed in the participants that I've had a great experience with for several years. And she has taught me a ton about lived experience. And I can openly admit to some of the things that Eva talked about. I assumed that, oh man, I'm a, you know, egg-headed academic. I foolishly assumed I knew everything about everything. And so some of those conversations and I mean, even some of the things I've said today are a reflection of previous interactions with that person that have helped me understand and shape my way of viewing the problem. So in order to get to that stage where from conception all the way through to completion of the project, you have to have long-term relationships, right? You have to have existing relationships, and of course new relationships will come, but you have to have that person that you can call that works in that space and be like, hey, or set up a meeting with or whatever it is and say, hey, what about this? And I think that's how we move to that space of really ensuring that the individuals affected by the data or who are contributing their data are part of the decision-making process. And then I'll say really quickly, you know, one of the big advantages to the bias issue that you brought up, when we start working with population level data, the biases are still there, right? And we know that, like, Eva's really proud of all the work they're doing in Quebec around AI. We've got a pretty great system of that, same in Alberta. But we know that when we feed biased data into anything, we're going to get biased results out. And so we need to really think hard about those biases. And some of them are, just by improving and getting population level data, we get better results. But we also need to be thoughtful about, the data reflect the healthcare experiences that people are having, especially if we're talking about, observational data, and those are founded in our biased world that we live in. And so we need to really think hard about those issues. So there's two non-connected answers there for you, Ross.
Thanks, Tyler. Mina, I'm going to go to you, and then Carleen, we'll let you close this off, and then we'll see what the sort of folks listening at home are kind of throwing into the chat. But Carleen, go to Mina and then to you. If I'm also going to throw a really interesting question that just came up in the chat about that you might want to take a crack at as so I'll give you a little time to think about it. Are decision makers ready to account for areas of value that matter to patients outside QALYs? And if value to patients is demonstrated in other ways by therapies or treatments, then how do we make sure that value is captured in funding decisions as well, because it's outside the sort of realm of like dollars per QALY. So I don't want to spring that on you right away, but I know you're going to have some thoughts on that. So Mina, why don't we go to you on kind of what do we need to do now, and then Carleen, you'll get a last crack at that and maybe have some thoughts on the value beyond QALY piece as well, and others might too. But Mina, to you, and then Carleen.
Sorry, am I answering the question about patients? Is that what we're So okay,
Yeah, Mina, you can certainly talk about the patient piece, but like this is the sort of immediate time horizon. This is the like, what do we do in the next 12 to 18 months? Eva covered the patient piece and Tyler jumped on it too. If you want to go there, absolutely, but do not feel constrained by the patient piece. Go anywhere you want to go.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll just quickly, just because I thought I was gonna, so I have some thoughts in my head. I won't build on the amazing answers that have been given by Tyler and Eva. I will just say that, I've been lucky enough that we've been sort of doing patient-oriented research and engaging with lived experience folks and doing a lot of work with citizen engagement before it was cool. And so it's just so valuable to what Tyler said about how important it is. And, within the guidance, we specifically, so the guidance again is a non-binding, it's, we specifically, to Eva's point, called out the need for two important parts. There's a whole bunch in there about patient partners, but the most important two parts that stand out to me that we were very adamant about was ensuring that teams from the very beginning include a patient. And we needed to be very explicit in that. And you'll see statements in there that are very explicit that there's no other, we don't say they need an epidemiologist or a statistician, which I think they probably will do anyway. But I think we needed to be very explicit that we think that they should have a patient on board on every team for an RWE study specifically. And then later on, we also talk about that outcomes, when selected, should also be based on patient preferences and experiences. So it's not just about patient-reported outcomes, which we also talk about, but also that idea of like picking out what's important and what are we missing, and when you're doing all of that, if feasible. So those things are very much embedded within the guidance and an important part. So shifting away to the question of what's next, and I think there's a Q&A that just came in around like, now that the guidance is written, what's done? And so I think for us, and my thinking was, and why I was like a very big proponent of developing the guidance first, and I know there was frustration about, this is great, you're telling me what I need to report and how to report it, but you're not telling me when I can use it.
Yeah.
There was two options here, right? If you think about it. We could have told people when they can report it and then just received a bunch of junk. I'm going to just be honest, like and then people would have been frustrated because they would have said, and we saw this a little bit with some of the early RWE submissions that came in, that there was a low quality bar and people didn't know. And then they'll say, well, you didn't tell me what it is. And I think what we also have to remember is that there's a big community that is not supportive of RWE. They're not at this panel, but they sent in their submissions and they talk to me all the time, and they're the RCT purists. And they don't think that there's a part of this that fits in. And I think they have some misunderstandings of what we believe when this should be used. But I think unless we can show them how high the bar is, we're not going to get their buy-in. And those RCT folks are not academics. They're people sitting inside the regulators. They're people sitting inside HTA agencies, and they're people inside companies. And I think we all know, I think we deal with them in different ways. So we had to set the bar really high. But now that we've set that bar and we said, this is what's acceptable decision grade evidence, I think you're going to start to see HTA agencies and regulators, and this is what's happening right now, figuring out when they need to use it, which is the second part of this. And I think what you're going to start to see hopefully in the next 18 months to 2 years is better, more prescriptive technical points of when they're going to use it. I don't think you're going to see it completely in the next 2 years, to be frank. I think there's going to still be a lot of learning, but I think we're going to better understand what are the scenarios of when and how to use it. And that's going to be really important to move this whole portfolio forward.
I can't help but saying, Mina, that to your comment about being at parties earlier on. So if anybody finds himself at a party this summer talking to an RCT purist, now you know everything you need to say in response to make sure that they want to keep talking to you in a robust and value-oriented
They may
way.
not
So
want to keep talking to you. I think that's a huge
Uh,
assumption, but
well, we'll challenge the biases and we'll move on from there. Carleen, to you for your thoughts on sort of immediate next steps to really take advantage of this opportunity, and maybe a little bit about life beyond quality if you want to go there.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that, because actually it was one of the points that I was going to bring up around the importance of evolving how we see broad value recognition, and real world evidence is going to be really key for this. Because the way we assess the value of new technologies really does need to keep up with the pace of innovation. And so, for all of us involved in clinical research and manufacturing and regulatory approval, funding, care delivery, we need to be looking at value in healthcare innovations as an investment in people, and investment in healthcare systems, and investment in society, rather than focusing on a cost within a medicine's budget. And if we do that, I really hope that will enable us to actually commit to investing more in the data infrastructure that we need to support decisions that actually look across that whole continuum of care and the access continuum, because we need to be able to measure value across all of it. And then, to answer that question a little bit, I think if stakeholders can come together early and agree on the relevant metrics to measure, be that quality of life, patient experience, patient-reported outcomes, carer impacts, and agree on what those metrics are early, I think it'll put us in a really good place in terms of how they're measured. The transparency will be there. We can build the trust and decide early what those protocols need to look like. And I think that's the key piece. This data can still be robust, even if it is outside of cost per quality. We know that patient preferences research, discrete choice experiments are really robust and are accepted by HTA agencies. And so are we doing enough of that research and actually meeting with stakeholders early to agree on what it needs to look like? So I think it's a two-way commitment that we both need to have. Firstly, in terms of making sure that within our trials as sponsors, we are working with patients early to ensure that outcomes that matter to them are included in our trials, and we're meeting with stakeholders and decision makers early to align on what those pieces need to look like. So I feel hopeful, but I think we just have to start. We need to stop talking about it, and we actually need to come with this evidence that's been fully co-created, and that's when we can make a difference.
Thanks for that, Carleen. Okay, let's see what folks had to say, and then we'll give the panelists a chance to sort of reflect a bit on that. And as some of these options come up, I think there's one really interesting question that you guys may want to reflect on as well. It came in about moving past the point where Canada is the land of pilots. And as somebody very eloquently put it, how do we move from experimenting to integrating? So here's some great specific examples. Tangible people sort of threw these actual answers in. So let's take a moment to reflect on those. And then in the back of your minds, think about this Canada as a land of pilots. And oh my God, how do we not have that be the future just the way it is? It is already. I'll just sort of call these out as I look at them. So we talk about openness to new and innovative approaches to data collection, inclusivity of patients. We've heard a lot about that. Patients has good underlying data use, easy interpretation of data. So making it accessible linguistically and conceptually. Third-party brokers, that would be really interesting. So the notion of having these honest third-party brokers helping to sort of foster public and private partnerships, who that could be and how that could work, I think is really interesting. Grassroots, focusing resources on not-for-profits, rural and remote, and thinking about the underrepresented kind of population, the equity lens to this. Decision makers, boosting their knowledge of RWE. Data governance models, leveraging what's already been done by community organizations. Huge investments in R&D. We're actually under-investing in so much R&D in Canada, which I think sort of strikes all of us as strange and surprising. Aligned commitment from decision makers across the access continuum. There's how we get away from concepts or pilots to actual embedding. ongoing and coordinated function of HCPs and patients. So yeah, certainly the clinician piece here too is really important. And then public-private collaboration. So lots of stuff there, great ideas, different degrees of granularity. Why don't I throw it back to all of you folks to see what, if anything, you want to pick up from these great suggestions. Eva?
Yeah, I'll just start with, I also am allergic to pilots now because it gives you pilotitis, which is paralysis by pilots. It really annoys me. So what we've started doing is not pilot projects, but demonstration projects, building in like a multi-stakeholder approach and the scaling up necessary to change minds as well as practices. So really doing that cultural change management piece that's so essential to actually shift the paradigm to where we need to go, whether it be precision medicine or this more, value-based approach where RWE is like an essential tool. So very specifically, I had briefly mentioned our OBA outcome-based agreement working group with Montreal and Vivo, which is a third party, an objective third party that kind of is able to talk to industry, to patient groups, to the government, to INES, etc. And in this demonstration project, it's really, we're approaching it as a learning health system kind of approach. And just to show you what a not pilot project looks like, we had multiple conversations with government, with different stakeholders, patient groups, and with INES. And now, just this last week, very good news that I'm excited about is that in their latest bulletin to manufacturers, we gently encourage them to put on paper what they were telling us because of this demonstration project, and to actually say, well, if you are open to collecting RWE and to look at outcome-based agreements, well, can you say that publicly? And last week in the INES bulletin, in the letter to manufacturers, there's a whole paragraph on page 2 at the bottom that says, we're open to new economic models and open to talking about like real world evidence in the context of reimbursement decisions. So that's like a really positive step forward. And if it was just a pilot project, I don't think it would go there. So I think that we need to build in that scalability, that multi-stakeholder approach from the beginning, not wait for perfection. In Quebec, something else that we do that's not awesome is sometimes we waited to have perfection before moving on. So we had the Quebec Cancer Registry 12 years too late because we were waiting for perfection. So that's what not to do. What is good to do is say, we don't have all the answers. We're not taking care of all the uncertainties, but let's get started and learn along the way together. And I think that's like a key way that we can actually address all these issues.
Eva, thanks for that. Anybody want to pick up on the public-private partnerships, honest brokering, this, the importance of having all these actors and all these voices involved, but the mechanisms of doing that? Carlene, I imagine you have a thought or two on that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be critical. I mean, we all have such unique capabilities to bring to the table, and there is no one stakeholder that's going to be able to solve for this alone. So I think it's only by coming together early, having really clear terms of engagement, terms of reference and norms that we work under, that's going to enable us to build this trust and move forward together. We've shown that we can do it, and transparency is really key to enabling that to work. I was just going to comment on, I was really curious about the community organisations have already created data governance models and have a lot of experience and ideas to scale up. They just need support. I would love to learn more about that. I'm not sure who made that comment, but that's a great example whereby, these capabilities, and sometimes it's the smaller organisations that have the greatest success because they don't have the levels of hierarchy and the numbers of people, and they just know what they want to achieve and they just do it. So I think I'd love to, I don't know who put that comment in and whether they're happy to talk to it, but I'm really interested in those types of opportunities outside of traditional healthcare institutions. We've got to be able to look beyond and look at some of the diverse approaches to be able to move forward, I think.
Thanks, Carlene. Tyler, anything you want to talk about in terms of sort of Alberta's approach to this. Lots of interesting players. I know you guys have at the consortium have done some really important foundational work with more to come. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the consortium itself, or sort of how you're seeing your provincial ecosystem evolve when it comes to some of these issues.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ross. So absolutely, and Carly nailed it. That like it's this constant flow, this constant need to try and get everybody at the table. We've had rather direct conversations with our Ministry of Health folks and be like, look, like, you need to come and play ball. You don't hold all the cards. You can't, some of those are, pretty direct conversations. But also it's about, helping them understand and see the value and, help them appreciate. So, that's sort of where I've got the longer and deeper relationships is in the public side. And so, working with those groups to be like, look, like, there's enormous value here, and just constantly encouraging them to come back and help us to try and drive that agenda forward. Luckily, we've been able to build that trust. We have partners within the ministry that see the value. And so when the inevitable happens, where we run into a roadblock of like, we seem to be at an impasse here, where we can't seem to find a solution, having that overall commitment to, yes, we see the value, so we can come back to the table, brainstorm ways to try and, to move things forward has been enormous for us in terms of our ability to continue to do things. And, we are doing some exciting stuff in Alberta. The Real World Evidence Consortium in Alberta is, we've been really successful with getting access to important data to be able to answer questions in a timely manner. And so I guess I'll just say, really, anybody that wants to continue this conversation after, happy to carry on these conversations, because there's some cool stuff that's happening.
Mina, do you want to pick up on any of these threads? We're approaching the sort of final thoughts portion of these 90 minutes. So maybe I'll give you a first kick at that can too.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think for me, one of the things that I've been pushing on is just that I think and specifically in Ontario, I think for things to move forward and try to catch up with Alberta and them running ahead of us, is that we probably need to start having some very tough conversations with people around the table. And I think you need to have all the stakeholders at the table, and we need to be talking about governance and bias when it comes to what's holding us back here. And I think this touches on that previous comment about lack of trust, and lack of trust is an important issue, but the only way that you can solve that is transparency. And transparency through a process, transparency in how we bring everybody together, and transparency in any governance that you do. And I think that'll build public trust. It'll bring more people at the table, and I think it'll drop some of the hesitation. So I think we need to basically have those conversations about what's holding us back rather than dancing around them. And that means like having a forum where everybody's around the table and being candid about what's really holding it back, and pushing on specific examples. So you've heard me kind of keep beating up on this, but like, how do we build governance? How do we have documentation that makes it easy and quick? And how do we build capacity, both in the data linkages and in those manners? And I think once we start tackling those things and build that infrastructure, then we have things ready where it's no longer a pilot. It's going to be a system and an infrastructure that's easy to tap into. But it takes kind of, some commitment and some political will to do that.
Thanks, Mina. Carleen, and Eva will give you the last word.
Yeah, I think Canada has all the ingredients. We have the expertise. We have so much potential. We've heard from the panel today, what's possible to achieve that learning health system that we talked about based on real world evidence. We just need that collective trust. We need the collective will and confidence to make it happen. And it's okay to learn from others as well who have implemented this successfully. So we can too. We can lead in data-driven healthcare rooted in real-world evidence, and our health system in Canada can be best in class because of it. So I think we have all the pieces. We just need to now move it forward together and have the confidence to do so. But it's there.
Thanks, Carleen. That's nicely optimistic. Eva?
Yeah, I just to build on that, I do think that if in Canada we have like some very, very strong patient advocacy compared to other places in the world, and that's something we need to leverage on top of the amazing academic and AI kind of expertise that we have. So I think we are, well positioned to be leaders, like other people have said. I think I would probably finally close in saying that, especially for rare conditions, which is something that I'm very preoccupied about, but also that there's the great benefit of RWE for rare conditions. I think we need federal, provincial, territorial collaboration more than ever, because, each individual siloed province is going to have 25 patients or less of this one condition. They can't make like very good decisions based on that. We really need to pool and aggregate the data. Yes, for everything, but especially for rare conditions. And, we have these rare disease policies and strategies and action plans like that should and could be, but it should be, one of the low-hanging fruit. Like, let's just collaborate on like pan-Canadian real-world evidence data registries for rare conditions, because that's a low-hanging fruit. It can make a huge difference. And we do need to improve that kind of collaboration. And if we don't do it elsewhere, can we please at least do it for rare conditions? Because there's a benefit to all right there. So yeah, I'll leave it with that. But I think that we are well positioned. I think that with people like this, the leaders around the table and elsewhere, I think we are starting to see the momentum shifting in the right direction. So I think it's really positive.
Amazing. Okay, it's 1:30. Thank you everyone who hung in for 90 minutes. Thank you on behalf of the Resilient Healthcare Coalition to all of you four panelists for being a part of this conversation. I think we touched on a whole bunch of incredibly important themes. We'll capture some insights, some perspectives, and some clips from all of this and send it back around to everyone who registered and beyond. And we hope that this is not the first time we meet as a group or a subset thereof around the RWE revolution. There's a huge amount of work to do, but there's a real collective enthusiasm and willingness to do it. So more from RHC soon, more on RWE soon. Thank all of you, and have a wonderful week. We'll be in touch.